If you don't deliver results, they're just going to kill your project anyway, your boss or your executives in the business. So I think the very best companies in the world, I don't know, for me, it's like, yeah, you look at Google or Apple or whatever, if they've been able to maintain these strong systems for entrepreneurial systems and management systems. And I just think that's what separates the great companies from just like the okay companies these days.
Welcome to RevOps Champions, a podcast designed for revenue professionals looking to advance sales and marketing initiatives through the role of RevOps within their organizations. In each episode, we feature leaders who are leveraging technology to drive operational efficiency, revenue, and improve the customer experience. Listen in and learn how to become a better RevOps leader within your own organization. Let's get started.
I am super excited today to have with me Rob Weber. You might not know this, but I've actually been wanting to meet you for a number of months. I'm glad we finally were introduced and are here today. I really enjoyed our initial quick conversation last week, and I'm looking forward to diving in here today. So welcome.
Oh, thanks a lot, Brendon. I think the topic and the podcast is really interesting. The lifeblood for every business is scaling revenue and kind of the revenue ops resonates with me as an entrepreneur now turned investor, the importance of being strong at scaling revenue.
Yeah, that's why I figured you'd be an awesome guest, and you have such a unique view just based on our initial conversation. So I'm really looking forward to digging in here. But so Rob, to get us started, can you tell us your career story sort of up until today? Where did you start that led you to where you are today in your professional career?
So kind of the short version is I grew up as a teenager in the mid 90s, kind of self-taught software developer, graphic designer, and sort of just, overall entrepreneur. Like I wanted to build businesses from about age 15 to age 20, my twin brother Ryan and I kind of started I call them like tinkering or hobbyists for the early days of the internet. And back then you could publish anything on the internet. Even if you weren't that talented, you would get a lot of traffic because there was just people forget about the early days of the internet. Like people were flooding onto the internet with dial up and there were hardly any websites back then. And so
Yeah.
we took those initial tinkering projects and kind of learned about search engine optimization and digital media and publishing. And then ultimately we launched a company in the spring of 2000, headquartered in Minnesota, eventually San Francisco as well, it was originally called freeze.com for free and easy software over the internet, and later became known as NativeX as we kind of evolved into the iOS and Android ecosystem maybe 10 years later. But what freeze.com was essentially a PC software publishing business. We looked around in the late 90s and saw that there was a ton of demand by consumers for free software or for software for their PCs. And we could see that broadband was just around that corner from our vantage point in the dorm rooms. Instead of buying packaged software, we knew people would start downloading software just before app stores and all that. So we built a publishing technology to power it all. We didn't actually even develop the PC consumer software. We would license it, but we would give it all away. And it was an ad supported business, which we were profitable 16 straight years. Our peak year, we
Wow.
did 70 million in revenue, 10 million in EBITDA, 170
Wow.
employees. And we were fortunate to have multiple exit events along the way. And the first exit event was when I was 25. It was the first time I had any money in my life. I grew up kind of more lower middle income. And I thought, well, we had a small group of angel investors. And so that's what led me into investing. They got a great return on their investment in my company. And I thought, wow, this would be great. This is easy money. Why don't I give some money to some other entrepreneurs? And so my brother Ryan and I made about 15 investments from 2005 to 2016 or so. And we had really good returns. And then we sold the last of our operating business, NativeX. So NativeX, the publishing business kind of eventually declined. As you can imagine, PC
Mhm.
software isn't what it was 10, 20 years ago. But we saw that, as soon as the iPhone shipped, we knew it was going to be like a whole paradigm shift. So we immediately took my brother Ryan off everything he was doing on the PC publishing business and said, go figure out iOS, right? Go figure out Android. And so we built this, they call it a software development kit or an SDK, where we
Mhm.
basically created a native advertising technology for the most popular social games really in the world. And so we reached billions of consumers with our embeddable code that these games had. You would recognize the games.
Wow.
You would have seen our ads. Anyone who played a game, you would have seen our ads. It became a tough business. We did sell it. And then after we sold the business, 2017, thinking about what to do next, we thought, hey, let's just scale up our investing activity. And that's when our fund, Great North Ventures, was launched. So
That's an awesome introduction. So Great North Ventures has been going for how long now then?
about, I think, a little over 4 years.
Okay. And just from what I've heard around the community here in the Twin Cities, I mean, you've had already a lot of impact and a lot of reach, which I'm not sure if we'll get into that today, but I'd love to talk more with you about that at some point. So, Rob, when you and I talked last week, one of the things I always like to get to when I'm chatting with someone who has figured out how to scale not only one business but multiple businesses, I try and figure out like what the formula is. And of course, as I'm doing that, I'm trying to match your formula with everybody else who I'm getting to speak to, and to try and see what the threads are. Of course, I guess I wasn't really surprised that you had a slightly unique take on it, even though there was, again, 80% of it is the same as what I'm hearing from a lot of other people. But when I asked you what your formula is for successfully scaling a business, you shared it's figuring out these 4 things. You tell me what they are, or I guess I can tell you to start off with. The first one you mentioned, I mean, you didn't hesitate for a second, and I guess you don't do that very often anyhow, but it was being customer centric. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, I think you see probably the biggest difference between those that are successful and those that are not is they're kind of the relentless pursuit of understanding customer needs. And as a more like a broader theme there, it's sort of like what broadly a market needs are. And I think the way you do that, at least the way I've done that, is a mixture of, I guess it's kind of an analytical mindset. And there's multiple ways to generate customer insights, but the easiest way and most common way is just start talking to as many customers as you can. There's certainly methodologies that can help you to ask questions in the most unbiased and kind of manner. I see sometimes people think they're taking away customer insights, particularly if it validates some concept or vision they have, when in reality, maybe that, isn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
An example I've seen where like startups fail is like they have an idea, they see a problem in a business. I invested in a business like this once. They were I won't name the company, but they were in the business of basically customer research for like survey software for restaurants. And, the
Mm-hmm.
founder was really good at go to market. So he had the first few dozen customers. So it was this kind of software and that would give you a URL. And then if you ate at a restaurant, you could collect kind of your net promoter score feedback from the customer. He had 10,
Mm-hmm.
20 restaurants chains using it. And then what I found out after I made the investment, small investment, was it just didn't scale. And what we learned is that, yes, the restaurants want to know about what their customers, why they're satisfied, but it's like the 12th most important thing for them. There's so many higher order problems that a restaurant has that actually understanding their customers was not very high. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
failure. That business failed, and it failed not because they didn't identify a problem, but this is the nuance to it, is what was the magnitude of the problem. This problem was not acute enough or at the highest order of problems for that restaurant owner or group to really to scale. And I think that's actually so that's in terms of being customer centric. I think, ideally you want to talk to a lot of customers and you want to do so with unbiased methods. What I always think is when you're building a business, research is generally pretty cheap, inexpensive. Where it really starts to add up is when you start building things, when you build, whether you're building, let's say you start writing thousands of lines of code, you got to hire engineers, you got to maybe whatever you're doing infrastructure wise. So it's so important that whatever you're building, you research and really validate the customers, problems and then the solutions. You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to rush to a solution. You want to do just as much testing on your solution to make sure it's oriented the right way. And then even in software businesses, typically go a layer even beyond that and start prototyping, and kind of then get feedback on the prototypes. And this all sounds really simple, but I'll tell you in
Mm-hmm.
practice, most of the entrepreneurs that I observe are not doing this well. They're just not. It's like, how many customers have you talked to? Oh, we've talked to 4. Oh, just show me your research. Like, can I see your interview notes? Oh, here they are. And there's like 3, it's like 3 Word documents. Like, what? You're going to go change your life to go build this business and that's it, you haven't really dug into this problem very well, right? So,
Mm. Yeah. So that whole research component, again, yeah, it seems so obvious, right? That if you're trying to build, I mean, most people, are starting a business with some sort of financial goal in mind, which of course goes together with some sort of a mission or vision of what they're trying to do. But eventually you got to tie it to a number, right? So whether that's 10 million or 20 million or 100 million or whatever it is, you'd think that if you're going to invest $50,000 in doing some sort of real research that might save you from investing another $1 million to get to the 10, 20, 50 million, it seems like a worthwhile investment. And I totally agree that the research has to be focused on the customer. So that's a really good reminder. And then the second thing, Rob, that you said was sort of part of the way you sort of naturally think about your formula was sort of technical execution. And you sort of added the word infrastructure, which I guess in your mind, those two kind of go together. Can you tell us a little bit more what you mean about technical execution? And on this one, just a quick shout out to your podcast, which of course is called Execution is King, which of course, when I heard the title of that podcast was like, okay, that is super catchy because we talk about, what eats what for breakfast all the time. And it's very seldom do you hear execution eats strategy or culture or whatever. So I love that title and I look forward to, listening to more of those episodes too.
yeah,
So technical execution.
yeah, I think, well, thanks. And I just always give me, as an investor, like give me a team that can execute at a high level with a mediocre idea all day long over a team that is executing even just average or poorly with a brilliant vision. And I think, and also when I think about the world of like a business today, I can't think of too many businesses that aren't tech businesses. Like it's hard to create a competitive advantage without having strong systems to create some level of defensibility and a competitive advantage. And so when I think about like technical execution in terms of building systems and software, it's okay to not be a technical founder, but I think
Mhm.
you got to be cautious then if you're going to build underlying technology and software to enable your business to understand what strong execution looks like. And there's some different ways you could approach this as an entrepreneur, or even a business owner. Certainly, I think what's really key is finding someone who has technical leadership, is vetted and is capable, who can then be kind of help you drive the expansion of a team. And I think what
Mhm.
I see is a lot of times kind of non-technical founders don't bring any technical competency to their early kind of leadership. And then they'll maybe outsource their development of some kind of technical system. And then inevitably they get low quality code. It's not extendable, not scalable, creates a lot of technical debt. And then they kind of wake up a year or two later and go, we got to rewrite everything. Well, that'll kill most companies. Like you can,
Right.
get a year or two into building something and then realize you screwed up and you got to start over. There's simple ways to address this. Like find someone, if you can't afford like a CTO, let's say, that is accomplished. And by the way, even in hiring a CTO, how do you hire a CTO if you're a non-technical founder? Everyone's going to look like a rock star if they're an engineer to you if you've never written a line of code before. So what you want to
Mhm.
do is, I think, find other people or have a pretty good idea are really strong at technology, and then allow them to help you vet your CTO. Or in the case of even hiring a contract developer, I'd recommend having some kind of advisory board or someone who's keeping an eye out for you as the business owner or the entrepreneur to make sure that you're creating something that's scalable. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is if you're building technologies is to basically create so much technical debt, they have to completely start over. That kills most companies, right? So I think that's really important. And of course, you could recruit like a technical co-founder, but I mean, you still need to vet that person properly. And I think that's so critical. I just see so many software startups get that wrong. And it's unfortunate because you can correct that if you just are intentional about it right from the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, there was so much in what you just said that, I mean, we could talk about that for over an hour. One of the things you alluded to right in the beginning, which actually I just hosted a panel last week at a global event. It's an organization called Harassus that has like over 1,000 attendees and speakers from all over the world talking about different topics of, the changing world that we live in essentially. And last week was what they called the Harassus USA meeting. And I hosted a panel with three, really smart people, and that the topic was every company is a technology company today, right? And of course, the whole discussion was around like, well, when you start, like, well, what company today is not a technology company? One of the panelists was the guy who runs a company who runs all the technology that powers Domino's Pizza, amongst many others. And he was, saying that Domino's, for example, now says, yeah, we're a technology company. We just happen to deliver pizza, right? But connecting the dots, the fact that you can now send a pizza emoji from your phone to Domino's and 30 minutes later, a pizza shows up at your door. But anyway, so that's, like I said, a whole
Oh,
conversation on its
I
own.
yeah, I totally agree with that. And they've taken their scale. And if you look at their ordering system, I mean, that's a multi-million-dollar software application there. That's not a simple thing to build. And the user interface and design is well built. It's very easy. One of the things I really like is just the progression and what they designed. Like it kind of shows you like step by step, like, all right, and how you customize it. I mean, I think it's created a real competitive advantage. And I think there's some articles written about this even where you can see as they started investing in this core order processing technology, it like turned around Domino's, right? Like, and I think this is why
Absolutely.
I think anyone who isn't kind of opening their eyes to the possibilities of how they can improve their business with technology probably is going to end up in a weak competitive position over time because there's so much efficiency you can bring even in a pizza business, right? So
Exactly. So if you can do it in a pizza business, then you can. And in fact, one of the other panelists was a guy in the ag. Well, the other two were both in Silicon Valley, and one was in agriculture and was talking about how they're using AI to essentially do the agriculture when it's like when the picking of the grapes is ready and all that kind of stuff. And agriculture was like in the last set of industries to adopt technology. Now suddenly they're jumping ahead because they can and they see the value. Anyhow, so this whole technical piece is so huge. And of course, the world that we live in, we're not building software, we're typically implementing and integrating software that's typically buy off the shelf, which is a little different. But our core partner there is HubSpot. And you probably know Dharmesh, who's also on startups. He talks about a lot of the same stuff that you do to help startups be successful. And then Brian Halligan, his partner and co-founder, he mentioned this 4 years ago when we were at the big inbound event in Boston. And he gave examples of whether it was Uber or Purple or they're not technology companies, but they are technology companies, right? Whether you build and sell mattresses or razors or whatever. And so this is not anything that's new. It's just that it's now catching on to more and more businesses. And to the point where if they don't catch on to what's going to happen to them, right? So Rob, moving on to the third thing that you mentioned, which was data-driven accountability is how you phrased it. I mean, feel free to rephrase it. But again, this is also one of the pillars that we talk about all the time in what makes for a successful RevOps strategy, which maybe we'll still get to. But tell me what you mean by a data-driven accountability.
Well, I think when you're working with entrepreneurs, I think they tend to have qualitatively, they have a sense of what a vision and what they want to build. And even when you say like product managers that are building software, I've just seen way too often, there's a lot of project managers who will let's say building a software application, will kind of look at it, say this is the features we need to build for this quarter, let's say. And maybe they deliver the features and then they move on to the next quarter set of features. In reality, the features don't mean anything. What's the value that those features can bring to your customers and the value then in turn that can bring to your business. And so where I kind of see that is you're not done as an entrepreneur or someone building a business just by checking a box. You're
Mm.
done when you can prove kind of empirically that you've delivered value, right? And so I think that is, it all kind of layers up from there. I think different businesses have different key performance indicators or KPIs. I think you have to think deeply about how you measure business. So I came from social gaming, social app world with the last business I had, NativeX. We had a whole different set of KPIs than probably most of like your typical businesses would. We didn't look at revenue at all in the beginning, the social app companies, the Facebooks of the world, their KPIs where it's really engagement and retention. They're designing experiments to basically just capture your time And they know if
Mhm.
they can create a really addictive, compelling app, that over time they can layer in monetization strategies. And I find this is like totally foreign to like as a set of goals for a lot of people. But I think you're seeing this. Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's hard for a lot of people to think of like some of my favorite businesses for the enterprise now are, you look at like Slack, and one of the reasons Slack was so successful is they had all these product driven growth loops where one user would start messaging another user, or they one employee would leave and go to another company, and that those communication applications tend to spread. And by the way, Slack came from a game development company. It was like actually a pivot. So the
Mhm.
original venture funded company was a game developer, and then they created Slack as an internal tool, and then they ended up canning the game was not successful at all. It was actually a huge flop. But they thought what they built with Slack was pretty interesting, and there you go. But
Wow.
that
I
is
didn't
one.
know that. That is super cool.
But it's really, I think there's a lot of ways where I think businesses don't really think about, like in terms of like, when you think about businesses, if you can delight your customers and you can measure that, that's probably going to earn the right to earn customer referrals. And I think delighting your customers, there might be KPIs that are related to that. Like how frequently are they buying from you? How, you could maybe try to measure in the social gaming world, we call it a K factor. Like, well, for every new customer you get, how many referrals do they make? And if you have 100% K factor, that means you're getting a new user for every new customer you add. You basically go viral, right? And if you think about a business in some of these different measurable ways, in terms of like your revenue generating strategy. And by the way, you don't need to have 100% K factor, to have scale your revenue. If you can introduce things to drive customer referral, even if you have a 50% K factor, that means for every time your sales or your marketing team lands a new customer, if you get half of one in return, you just reduce your customer acquisition cost significantly. So I think there are ways to just think about scaling revenue. And I just think these are some of the most powerful from an investment return. If you can find ways to kind of get this sort of create a great product, but then find ways to hopefully get people referring it. That's always your best source of customers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which in fact, it's funny because in my last episode that hasn't even gone live yet, we got to which was a very smart CMO here in the Twin Cities. Also in the software space, we started talking about, so we've been a HubSpot partner out for 8 years, and I signed up for a course at HubSpot in Cambridge, Massachusetts, soon after we became a partner, and realized actually that I shouldn't have actually been there because it was meant for internal people or whatever. But somehow I ended up in this course, and the whole thing was being presented by Brian Halligan, the CEO and co-founder at that point of HubSpot. And I learned for the first time 8 years ago what every SaaS company supposedly, what their two metrics or KPIs are, which are, and you've just touched on them, both implied and explicitly, which are LTV and CAC, right? And if you think about LTV, and of course, there's a whole bunch of different ways to calculate LTV. One of the complications with calculating the lifetime value of a customer is referrals. But once you figure that piece out and you say then it also reduces your cost of customer acquisition, that's when a lot of the magic starts to happen. But it really starts with back to your first point of customer centricity, right? So until you know who that customer is, it's difficult to figure out what their lifetime journey looks like and therefore what their lifetime value is. I like how we sort of done that full circle. To your point, you need to have qualitative and quantitative KPIs or data in order to make good decisions. When I said, what is your formula? Those were the three that you mentioned, right? Customer centricity, the whole technical infrastructure, and then the data-driven component. But then later on, you mentioned something to me which almost sounded like a fourth part of your formula, which was the fact that you believe in product-driven growth. Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess I kind of use that Slack example of like in product driven growth. Let's say we're incubating a new company called NextGem. It's targeting eBay it's a consumer business. But
Hmm.
what we're doing is, if you look at it's in the trading card space. So some people collected like baseball cards as a kid. That industry, the resale market for trading cards in the US is about $15 billion annual. eBay is just shy of 5 billion annual. And when we look at the eBay market, they actually don't have most of the supply that people want, even with that tremendous scale. Like people who are really into trading cards, a lot of the most valuable cards are just like, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a Kobe Bryant that was kind of sold for $2 million and it made ESPN. Everyone had turned. Well, that's because that's the most
Right.
valuable. It's the most rare and valuable Kobe card, and it's never been on eBay, probably. I don't think it has. In
Right.
years, it's been around for 20 years. It's never been on eBay. And so one of the things with this next gen business we were building, we realized that this is a supply constrained market and all these people have these assets just sitting in storage somewhere. There's no really way to discover who owns these assets. There's a lot of people who would love to buy that Kobe that went for 2 million, the special card, but nobody can find it. When designing the business, we were trying to solve, all right, how do you come up with a solution so that you can take inventory of the world's trading cards? So when someone wants to buy it, you can actually locate it. So we kind
Right.
of came up with this vision for a product where we built using artificial intelligence and computer vision. We built like a technology that you basically hold your iPhone 10 or later over a trading card, and it does all this different data features that basically scan in your card in 4K, and then it reads all the data off of the card and does all this post processing magic. And then based on capturing your card, we basically then provide you all these additional tools to share it. So it's almost like the way Instagram started. It
Hmm.
started with a few basic photo features for people who wanted to upload photos to Facebook. But guess what? That utility, people came for the utility, but they stayed for the network, right? And that's kind of when we designed NextGem. Now we're building community that is sort of oriented around digitizing your own personal trading card collection. And just getting started. We launched it like 60 days ago. But this is
Oh,
sort of like, I think businesses, you can design systems that what we're shooting for from day one, when we're building this, we're designing it to get to 100% K factor or higher. That's one of our goals. And we're measuring
wow.
it and we're doing every element of the design as we iterate, is thinking about how can we keep that user using the app and excited, but also how do we get them sharing, using our utility to share and bring their friends with. I'll give you an example like in the NextGen app. We haven't done it. It's in private beta, but or you see this in other apps. If you have a software business or any business, what step do you ask for a referral? Some apps that are really viral, before you even get into the app, they ask you to invite two friends. Well,
Hmm.
if that's how you design your customer journey, you're probably going to have the chance for more referrals because there's always going to be some natural drop off or churn. So I think there's just way of using kind of, when you design a system to think about how can we build a product that actually encourages people to bring other people to it. And I think this is really, really hard for people. I think people running businesses, I think there's an abundance of people who can design what I call like single player experiences or single user, single customer journey. I think the world is a great shortage of people who can think about multiplayer, multi-user experiences. I think these are some of
Hmm.
the most exciting ways to scale revenue because if you can start getting that customer referral flywheel going, and it's not just consumer, it can be enterprise. I mean, look at Slack. Like there's lots of ways to design kind of these sort of product driven growth loops. I think some of the best work on this, there's a book called The Cold Start Problem by Andrew Chen. If you haven't read that book, I'd highly recommend it. Andrew was in the growth team at Uber, and then he went on to Andreessen Horowitz, very obviously one of the more well-known VCs in the world.
Hmm.
And before that, he was running a consulting kind of community called Reforge for growth marketers. And they basically share kind of best practices. So the book is really like he did a lot of blogging on some of the key aspects of this kind of product driven growth. And then
Hmm.
he took all these like topics that he had been blogging about for years and kind of put it together into one. It's probably my favorite book right now. And I think if you were to read that book, you couldn't help but thinking about in your business, like these are the most powerful financial outcomes in the history of humanity. So if you're ambitious, you'll get done reading that book and you go, man, even if you only take away 10% of some of the ideas in there, like it can really change the way you think about the world.
Awesome. Well, you actually beat me to it because I typically ask towards the end of the episode here, if you have any book recommendations. So I'm going to take that as your book recommendation.
Yeah, that
You
would
said it
be
was,
it. I love it. I've actually read it twice already. I don't even think it's been out for more than like 2, 3 months. I'm probably going to read it a third time. It's so good. It's really
so it's,
good.
so it's
Yeah.
Cold Start by Andrew Chen.
Yeah. The cold start problem. Yeah, cold start
Okay.
problem. Yep.
Okay. Okay, cool. So, Rob, I want to just ask one question related to what you were just talking about on product driven growth. And that is, do you think, because I mean, you're coming at all these things from a sort of a software perspective, right? As a software business, a software product, do you think product driven growth is transferable to other industries that are not software companies? So, there might be technology companies, but not software companies.
I mean, I think there's certainly product types that are going to have the potential to introduce more product driven growth. But
Hmm.
I think most businesses have opportunities to kind of inject product driven growth strategies. I think
Yeah.
if you're intentional, personally, as like an entrepreneur who likes to start companies or launch new products, I definitely have a bias towards trying to be in businesses, invest in businesses or develop businesses that can take advantage. I do it because I think they're going to create the strongest financial returns. But by the way, so I'll give you some examples, right? Like, I don't think Tesla actually, in my estimation, could do a lot more to create product driven growth through their software. So, like, for example, like I'm on the wait list to order to get a Tesla and they don't ask me for any to refer any friends. They don't do anything like that. But you know
Hmm.
what? They designed a beautiful product, and everybody just driving it around is creating is building the brand. And the bigger they get, the more people are seeing that Tesla vehicles and buzzing about it. I also think like starting at the top of a market, like they did, like on the more on the luxury side, and then kind of working their way down. It's easier to take a really top luxurious brand and then go down market than it is to go up market with a brand. Or even like I think of iPhone. I think why is Apple the most valuable company in the world? I think a big part of it is every time you pull your iPhone out of your pocket, someone is seeing you. I've never really heard anyone try to approximate how Apple as a personal computer was not that big of a company, but
Hmm.
I don't think we'll ever really be able to measure how much of Apple's success has been driven just by people seeing other people pull out their iPhones. But I think that's product driven growth, right? So there are
Hmm.
ways to, I think there's ways, I think Steve Jobs, like even when designing the iPhone, like, everyone knows how meticulous they were with like, and for him, it was famously even the parts of the product that people wouldn't see. Like he wanted the inside of a device that was locked and looked beautiful. It was like,
Right.
that's kind of like maniacal focus on like quality and design. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of ways. Product driven growth doesn't have to be just software. It can be, there are ways that I think you can think about like, how does the use of a product by my customers, how might we encourage that use to get them in situations, and marketing or customer communications could be used to encourage that. Maybe you have a product that is usually used at home and people aren't really going to see it as much. You can try to find ways maybe in your post purchase communications to try to introduce ways to drive referral or things of that nature.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean that is true. If we had more time, I would sort of want to dig into that one a bit deeper, but I'm going to move on because I know that there's a connection between product-driven growth and customer centricity. We just not going to get there today, unfortunately. So, Rob, switching gears for a minute, how familiar are you with sort of RevOps? I mean, you mentioned in the very beginning that you think it's a very relevant go-to-market strategy or model, but how would you define, revenue operations or RevOps from your perspective?
I think it's kind of your strategy and your systems to kind of drive revenue growth is kind of how I would state it. I think certainly there's a lot of tools and technology to enable stronger systems for support developing and supporting customers. I think
Hmm.
one of the bigger problems I've seen is there are some pretty robust tools, but I think, and this is where I think like someone who really is a master integrator of like HubSpot could really help. I think a lot of businesses will acquire tools and things of that nature, but not really fully utilize their potential benefit. And I think
Hmm.
that's probably one of the things I think is unfortunately just really missing because there's so many, these tools are pretty affordable on the tool side. I think on the revenue ops side, I think usually some companies have dedicate like a chief revenue officer that might be an executive that kind of owns it, or that could be like often it's could be some sales or marketing leadership, depending on the business. But I
Right.
think ultimately, I think it's kind of the revenue ops is kind of driving. And it's both the sales, but also the operational execution. I think a lot of companies. I've been a part of a lot of companies that have really sales driven leadership, but they're not really maybe as strong operationally. And really, to run a business effectively, you got to have strong operations too. It's got to be the full, and ideally, your operations and your sales systems and leadership are very kind of tied at the hip and work well together. Certainly businesses start to break down and struggle with growth. They can be really strong at signing customers, but if they operationally are bad at onboarding them or supporting them post purchase, they're not going to be a very successful business anyway. So I think that sometimes you don't hear as much talked about operations, I feel like, but I think that's when I think about revenue operations, probably, I don't know, do you feel like most of the like your clients or in your experience, do a lot of the operations teams house inside of sales these days, or do you still see those as independent functions?
Yeah, well, that's actually really, I was just thinking about that as you were talking, because so I think that there are different companies at different stages, different sizes. But if you take companies sort of between 100 million in revenue to about a billion in revenue, the ones that we're working with and know where we can add a lot of value to, they're kind of going two ways. Right now, the CTO typically has a much more important role in the boardroom and at the C level and is working literally side by side with the CEO. But what we see developing also on the other side is the CXO, right? Where so it's comes back down to the customer experience piece. But I think even if it's a CXO who owns the whole customer experience in a particular organization, they are working super tightly with the CTO or the CIO who's responsible for putting together all the systems. What I really liked about, and I see that the parallels between your sort of execution mindset, to me, execution and operations are kind of the same thing, right? And of course, revenue operations, and I love the way you summarized the strategy and systems to drive growth. That's exactly what it does. And that's probably one of the simplest explanations I've seen for it, because revenue operations is a go-to model to essentially build your growth engine, right? And every organization decide for themselves, like who are the people who are going to drive and own that. But where we're seeing the most success is like the CEO literally is talking about it every single day, even if the CTO is the one who's really making it happen every day and pulling all these teams from sales, marketing, customer success. And if they have any other ops, finance ops, product ops, whatever, they pulling it all together.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I've always thought like, for an example, like CFOs are really good at measuring and reporting, generally speaking. And I always thought like so much of the success in scaling like kind of revenue and growth is sort of the analytical side of it and measuring it and reporting off of it and creating management systems around it. I feel like, I don't know, it's been really rare in my career, let's say I've been a part of 50, 60 companies. I can't even barely think of any people who grew into those kind of roles from like the finance organization. It very
Hmm.
much seems, which is surprising to me, but I think at it overall, what I look at, what it takes to be a strong leader, CEO or some of these other key areas is kind of two major skill sets. You got to be analytical, and then you also have be creative
Hmm.
because you have to be able to look at the data and kind of understand what it's telling you about your customer and your business. Then you have to be creative. And I think that's maybe where the financial function tends to fail is they're just not very creative. And I think
Yep.
at the end of the day, I think that's what will never be automated, with systems and technology is like creativity is just part of like, that's one of the things humans do really well, no matter how much artificial intelligence you have or whatever. Like, I think we're a long ways off from creativity and also like human empathy. I think those are things that are like, I think that are really sometimes undervalued, inside of organizations where, and it's the rare person who's both quite analytical and quite creative that I think it can really unleash. If I'm thinking about like building up a growth team, like you're naturally gonna have some people who are a little more analytical or maybe some others that are a little more creative, but hopefully you've created a team that has some really strength in both areas. Cause I think if you're
Hmm.
thinking about growth, if you just have all the reporting in the world and all the marketing systems in the world, if you don't have the creativity to think about to kind of move the business forward, it isn't going to matter. I think ultimately, like it takes a lot of creativity to grow a business.
Right. I mean, essentially what you were saying, I guess, is there needs to be somebody who's driving the innovation, right? And it's typically different people. The people who have the vision and drive the innovation are not the same people who are executing to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
And like you say, and for the rare few people, and you might be one of them, but who actually have both of those, that's very unusual. So it's not something that most people can figure out. And it's typically a partnership that you see. And, we're here in the Twin Cities, of course, as EOS is a very popular business operating model, otherwise known as traction, where they talk about the visionary and the integrator are the two people, the partnership essentially that grows and runs a successful business. But we see this third role that we've touched on multiple times just today, you and I, that most people don't talk about. And I think is going to be the third seat at the table of every company in the future, which is that chief product officer or chief technical officer, whatever you want to call them. I think any company going forward who has a visionary and an integrator is going to need that third product person. I was actually having a conversation with a bank that we used locally yesterday. I was chatting with the COO, who's the integrator, obviously has a counterpart who's the visionary. And she shared with me how they hired their first CTO in September of 2019. And if they had not done that, they would ended up being one of the most successful banks in Minnesota during COVID with the loans that all the businesses need to be processed. If they hadn't hired the CTO 6 months before, and he hadn't set up the systems to automate a lot of that process, they wouldn't have been able to do it. So I thought that was a great example.
Yeah, I like the EOS framework. It makes a lot of sense to me. Sometimes though people get really hung up on like frameworks too early. Like,
sure. Yeah. You have to have the sort of the vision and strategy figured out before you start using EOS.
I always thought about, like, to me, the best companies in the world, there's sort of two things you need to have like a really strong long-term business. I think you need to have strong entrepreneurial systems and strong management systems. And I think they're sometimes at odds. Management systems
Absolutely.
are more about controlling. And I think you think about like, the companies who do though, most companies as they get big, they tend to become more dominant by management systems, and then they tend to suck at entrepreneurial systems. And then in the early stages, you can actually get by with almost no management systems. It's like you got a small team, you don't have a lot of resources to control. And then entrepreneurial systems, that customer centricity is even more magnified. You're fighting for your life, and new products or new development. Even in a big company, like if you don't deliver results, they're just going to kill your project anyway, your boss or the executives in the business. So I think the very best companies in the world, I don't know, for me, it's like, yeah, you look at Google or Apple or whatever, if they've been able to maintain these strong systems for entrepreneurial systems and management systems. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's what separates the great companies from just like the okay companies these days is like, and I think signs that a big company has like a bad entrepreneurial system is like probably if they have like some team over here that does innovation, right? Like that isn't good. You don't have
Yeah.
a team at Google that does innovation. It's the whole DNA of the company, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think it's very wise. Like, I think you want to create a culture where the management and the entrepreneurial systems kind of coexist with each worker to some level. You want
Absolutely.
you want people
Yep.
thinking about like, I don't know. That's how you come up with breakthroughs, I think. If you just I don't know. I think it's
It's
really
actually
hard to do because I think they are at odds, a lot of it. Like management entrepreneurship systems, there's a lot of tension between them. They
one of
don't
the
make good
people,
bedfellows necessarily.
right.
Yeah.
But one of the people who figured that out, and in fact, it's been mentioned multiple times on this show in the last 6 months, is Jeff Bezos on Amazon, where his culture of every day is day one. That is what that was designed to do. And then clearly they figured out the management systems because otherwise they wouldn't have scaled to the level that they have. So just having that culture of every day we're innovating for tomorrow, and then tomorrow we're going to innovate again for the next day. Because as soon as you stop doing that, you're dead, which
Yeah.
is, I think, is a really powerful way to approach it. Rob, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I need to ask you one last question. And it's been super fun. Thanks so much for spending this time with me today. The last question I have for you is, what is one tip that you would give to the people that are listening and watching this episode to assess? So we use the 3 A's: assess, align, or accelerate. In our case, it's assess, align, and accelerate. What is your tip that you can give that either will help people assess, align, or accelerate the impact that they can have in one of these 4 areas in the business? One is revenue growth and scalability. Number 2 is profitability. Number 3 is customer experience. And number 4 is employee experience or happiness. So
Yeah.
whatever the tip is might touch one or all 4 of those.
So in my prior business, we had the good fortune as we scaled to recruit a now retired kind of executive, but Andy Johnson. Andy was the first in the 90s. Fingerhut was one of the real pioneers of e-commerce, and that was here in the Twin Cities. the first finger art website was called Andy's Garage off of Andy Johnson. They didn't want to put the finger art brand on their website on this new thing of the internet. So
Mhm.
they sold that business to Federated for 1.7 billion in 1999. And Andy sort of took some time off.
Wow.
And then I recruited him to be our CEO as we were scaling our business. We had naturally very strong entrepreneurial systems because I'm an
Mhm.
entrepreneur down to my core. But like when we brought Andy on, one of the things I learned from him was to not second guess people's intentions. I think inside of companies, often people, there's always some kind of tension. It's just human nature between people trying to do work together or
Mhm.
interact for that matter. And I think there's a tendency for like finger pointing or for people to start questioning the intentions of their coworkers or other customers or whatever. And I think
Mhm.
fundamentally, like people have good intentions. They're not trying to screw you. They're not trying to hurt, harm your career. And if you can just sort of get past the fact that people don't have bad intentions, if you default to people have good intentions, I think about even like that so much of the outlook for what you're building or with your colleagues or your understanding of where they're coming from can get a lot easier. And you'll be able to do things in teams that that'll just come a lot more naturally. And it seems really simple, but just don't question people's intentions. I just see that how much
Mhm.
conflict comes from that. I think that's how you create real alignment is when you can create a team where you can kind of just stomp that out of the culture where it's like, we're not going to question people's intentions because of X, Y, or Z or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
the
That
other
is an
one,
awesome tip.
yeah.
Yeah.
The second one, another one from him was just real quick was on accountability. So prior to him joining our company when we were at 50 employees, we didn't really share a lot of information too broadly because we were concerned that that we didn't want to be, I don't know, you don't want all your information out there. And
Mhm.
one of the first things he did when he joined our business, as we went from like 50 to 170 employees, was actually basically open up everything. Maybe sans a few things that for legal reasons, like, individual pay, let's say. But like
Mhm.
once you create an organization where all the information is out in the open, now can create a culture centered around accountability where all of your employees, you're not just bottling up trying to solve problems. All of your employees have all the same information you have, and now they can try to solve those problems. And man, is that a much more fun business to be in. Like, if you're
Absolutely.
thinking about growth, if you're running a business where you're keeping all the scorecards close to the vest, the faster you can move away from that, I think, yes, you will give up some things. Your information will be out there more, but it's super important in centering on accountability to just make information widely available inside your organization. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And of course, I mean, yeah, there's so many things that you can dig in just there. I mean, for one is perception is everything, right? So, and communication is so hard. If you think you're communicating one thing to your team and they're understanding something different, that lack of transparency can really hurt you. But to your point, if you flip that around and create a culture of accountability, and the fact that instead of saying people don't have good intentions, you say people do have good intentions. That
yeah,
I think that's super powerful.
give them the
Yeah.
information and assume they're going to have good intentions. You'll be surprised because almost everyone has good intentions. People, it's kind of human nature. I mean, that's what Chris Sacca famously passed on the first round of Airbnb, and he's the most successful venture investor in the world. His fund return last publicly reported, this like $40 million fund delivered a 200x return. He passed on Airbnb because he thought people would trash homes and it would never work. I heard him on a podcast basically admitted he just said he learned that the human nature is like inherently good. Like, and I think we just need to be more trusting, right? So those are some of
That's a
the
good
biggest
example.
mistakes I see, and people make it over and over and over again, where they're just questioning people's intentions or that they're going to try to do harm. When in reality, most people are going to do good most of the time, right? So,
Yeah.
all
That's
right, I got to run,
Rob.
Brendan. Yep.
Rob, thanks so much. This was awesome. Take care, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you for checking out this episode of RevOps Champions. This show is powered by Dynamico, a HubSpot consulting firm helping businesses level up the technology systems that power their ability to scale. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow RevOps Champions wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Or visit RevOpsChampions.com to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.